Hi everyone, I'm Wes Gale. Welcome to the program. This is our very first video cast, and in this video cast we're going to be talking about project management. Specifically, what is project management? For those of you who are familiar with the field, you may have noticed over the last 20 years that there's been increasing demand for folks who have project management skills. And the reason for this is that there's greater recognition among the executive ranks of all organizations that project management skills are going to be the leading contributor to innovation and productivity within our organizations. Now, 20 years ago, telecom played this role. It seemed every year there's some amazing new development coming out of the field of telecom. Whether it was the advent of cell phones or the emergence of broadband capability or the rise of the internet, there was always something that seemed to come out of telecom each year that dramatically improved the productivity and capabilities of our organizations. But beginning in the early 90s, capability and information technology started playing a more dominant role, and by the late 90s, expertise in software development or systems administration became critical to the success of our organizations. But now it's project management's time. While there are still sparks of innovation that come out of both telecom and IT, senior management now recognizes that the greatest contribution to productivity and innovation will come out of those disciplines that fall under the umbrella of project management. Consequently, we're going to spend a significant amount of time in our videocast talking about project management. So perhaps it's best to start off by discussing what it is we mean when we say project management. So let's begin by looking at some definitions of project management. Okay, we're going to look at a couple of definitions here, and the first one comes from PMBOK. And PMBOK stands for the Project Management Body of Knowledge. PMBOK is a collection of methods and practices that are published by the Project Management Institute. They're the folks who also administer the PMP certification program. And PMBOK offers up this definition of project management. It says that project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet project requirements. Now, if we were to parse this a little bit, we would see that there's actually three pieces to it. There's the application of something, the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques. So we're applying something. And we apply those items to project activities, so all the things that are going on inside of a project. And we do so in order to meet project requirements. So we apply knowledge and skills to project activities in order to meet project requirements. And that sounds reasonably complete. Now let's look at what Answers.com has to say about project management. They define project management as follows. Project management is the discipline of planning, organizing, and managing resources to bring about the successful completion of specific project goals and objectives. And that's a little bit different than what PMBOK has to say, and there's really two major pieces to this definition. First, there's the component of discipline. There's a discipline of doing all sorts of things, whether it's planning or organizing or managing, but there's a discipline associated with it. And we are applying that discipline in order to hit project goals. And I think this gets a little closer to our definition of project management by lifting the sights of what folks think about when they contemplate project management from the level of doing project activities and meeting requirements to the level of, look, there's a discipline here. It's more than just what you do. It's how you do it. It's how you think about things. And by the way, it's not just enough to meet the requirements. You've got to achieve the goals. We don't do projects in order to meet requirements. We do projects in order to achieve goals. So we may only do some of the requirements, but we need to achieve the project goals. So this seems to be a more conceptual view of how project management works. Now that said, they're both good definitions. They're necessary components to understand in order to have an appreciation of what is project management. But in and of themselves, we don't think that they're sufficient. And the reason they're not sufficient is that they really don't speak to why we do projects and in what environment we do projects. How do projects unfold? And the reason why we do projects is to change things. We want to make things better. We don't undertake projects to make things worse. We undertake projects to make things better. And that means we're going to have to change things. And it is the management of the process of change that we at Kale Partners believe is the central understanding you need to have about what is project management. In fact, we believe that project management is really all about managing the challenge of change. Now, in introducing organizational change through projects, we need to understand that there's two different types of change we can try to implement. The first is that we can add something to an existing system. So the system already exists, whether it's a software system, whether it's a business process, whether it's a way of making decisions, whatever. There's an existing system, but we're going to add something new to that system. And the second type of change we can introduce is to create something that is completely new. Either we're going to develop a software application to replace an existing manual process, or we're going to implement a new process to support a new product that we're fielding. Whatever the case may be, when you talk about introducing organizational change, there are basically two flavors of that: adding something new to an existing system and creating something that has not existed before. But in either case, you are changing how things have been done. You're introducing change. And there are two challenges associated with introducing change. And those challenges are, first, the problem of risk. And secondly, the fact that people don't react very well to problem number one. Now let's take a closer look at each of those in turn. First, the problem of risk. Thinking about projects and changing things, there are all sorts of risks. There are risks in whether we're going to meet the budget, whether we're going to be able to deliver all the scope, whether we're going to do things on time and hit the schedule, all sorts of risks. But all of those risks can be lumped into two big buckets that most folks have an intuitive understanding already. The first bucket of risks is failure. And this is the pretty obvious risk that most folks believe that project management was ostensibly created to address, to make sure that we're able to do something and to do it in such a way that we meet the expectations of the project, whether those are scope, time, money, or quality expectations. Okay? But there's a second risk that's a little bit less obvious, and that's the risk of disaster. And what this is that in addition to failing to meet the project's objectives, we actually break a bunch of things along the way, whether we violate existing processes or principles or break the law or just leave people confused as to what's going on. The fact of the matter is that we actually make things worse than where we started. And disaster is a very, very bad thing. We'd like to avoid disaster. But folks don't necessarily engage in understanding project management in order to avoid disasters. They want to avoid project failures. They kind of assume that disasters should not occur along the way, but they can. Now, these two types of risks are what I call direct risks, and that they are directly associated with the satisfaction of the project's stated goals and objectives. But there's a third risk, an indirect risk in project management that most instruction in project management doesn't say very much about. And that is the risk to me. And that's when a project participant begins to believe that there's something about this project that presents a personal risk to them. And this can be felt by any stakeholder, any participant of the project. And it's felt very personally. This isn't something that will be explicitly clear to you. Other people aren't going to necessarily see that this individual is feeling threatened by what's going on in the project. And this personal risk could range from a sense that I could lose my job if this project succeeds, to I'm going to have to learn new skills and abilities that I'm not sure I'm capable of, to, oh my goodness, if this project succeeds, they're going to replace the vendor that I wanted to bring in here. And that vendor's promised me 10,000 options if we bring them in. Well, I certainly don't want this project to succeed because that will cause me to lose those options. So this sense of personal risk could take on many different types of expressions. And how it emerges is that it comes from one of two sources. The first one is when the implications of project success become clear to the participant. Now, while all well-formed projects will start off with goals, objectives, and requirements when they're launched, most projects typically have only a very dim understanding of what the implications of the project will be. For example, what will the organizational structure or reporting relationships be after this project is implemented? Or what impact will this project have upon funding allocations or headcount? Or what will this project mean to reporting? How much reporting? What level of reporting? What granularity of reporting? Cycle time? How fast will we have to do things? What will this mean in terms of training or quality of service expectations? All of these things are typically sorted out post-launch. So an understanding of what these implications are will dawn on folks over time. And the second source of this risk to me is when problems arise. Now, when we say problems, we're talking about true functional problems with the project. We're talking about technology or vendor failures. We're talking about insufficient funding, changing priorities, things of that nature. We're not talking about manufactured problems that are generated by folks who are beginning to comprehend the implications. So these emergent problems are separate and distinct from the problems that might be created by folks who are beginning to become aware of the implications of project success. Okay? When we think about emergent problems, there are really three aspects to them that contribute to this sense of risk to me. First of all, an emergent problem is a surprise, and no one likes surprises. Secondly, major emergent problems mean there's going to be accountability for fixing those issues. And most people like accountability even less than they like surprises. And finally, even minor problems have a period of uncertainty around them when it's not clear which way this problem is going to break. Is it going to be a big problem? Is it going to be a small problem? Is it going to be a problem I got to fix or someone else is going to fix? But that period of uncertainty makes people fearful. And fear derived from uncertainty is one of the elemental problems in managing human endeavors. If uncertainty is not consciously addressed, folks can start behaving instinctively as opposed to reasoning things out, and that can create a very painful situation for everyone. And so this risk to me is an indirect project risk that envelops all projects. And while you may not be able to see it, it's there. It's residing inside everyone sitting around the table. And one of your responsibilities as a project manager is to comprehend this risk to me and develop methods that will allow you to mitigate this risk as well. Now you've got these three risks: the risk of failure, the risk of disaster, and the risk to me. And together they comprise that first problem, the problem of risk. But why do you have to do anything about them? Well, that's because of the second problem, the problem of how people react to risk. You see, when people are confronted with risk, that may generate what we call unproductive behaviors. Folks don't like risks. It causes them to do things that they otherwise might not do. They might start showing up late or be absent from meetings. They might delay or avoid making important decisions. They might engage in rumor mongering, whatever. There's a whole list of things that people might engage in that are what we call unproductive behaviors. And these unproductive behaviors, on a transactional basis, are generally pretty minor. You don't have to worry about them. But the problem with unproductive behaviors is that they tend to accrue. Not only can they get worse over time, but they can also proliferate. Others can witness unproductive behaviors in one individual and start engaging in the same behavior themselves. And at some point, these unproductive behaviors can become so great that you start experiencing something we call resistance. Okay? And resistance is unproductive behavior that has reached the level that support and momentum are being drained away from the effort. This resistance can be so bad that it can actually kill a project. You can lose so much of the mind share of your project, you can lose so much of the support of the stakeholders around you to investing time and effort in the project that the project actually grinds to a halt and dies. But unfortunately, having your project die or get killed off by management is actually not the worst thing that can happen from unchecked resistance. Resistance, if left unaddressed, can lead to something even more dangerous, and that is a loss of confidence. What I'd like to do here is use a little schematic to explain what we mean when we say a loss of confidence. If you have difficulty in either using the proper methods for managing the risks of failure and disaster, or managing the stakeholder's sense of risk to me, you can enable so much resistance to develop that even if the project is succeeding, you personally are failing. And this condition of you failing personally is what we call a loss of confidence. And this loss of confidence can be expressed in many different ways. It can range from subtle things like being moved into a new role like special projects, or less subtle things such as being moved out of management into an individual contributor role, or receiving a bad performance review, or even outright termination. Did you follow that? Did you follow the reasoning there? Note that I said up here, it's the manner in which you manage the risk of failure and disaster that determines whether you're going to incur resistance. While what you do to manage risk is important, here we're also focused upon how you do it. You need to take effective steps to manage failure and to manage disaster risks, but you need to make sure you do not undermine the support of those around you. If you're not careful as you manage those true risks, you can actually build resistance among your stakeholders. So you have to be attuned to understanding, to seeing, and to hearing what the project means to various stakeholders. And if you do not do this, then you will undoubtedly incur resistance from those around you. And that resistance has two potentially negative consequences. The first is that the project could fail, but the more subtle and dangerous one is that irrespective of whether the project succeeds or not, you personally could fail. So the project could deliver, you meet all the requirements, you do it on time, you do it on budget, but everyone is so polarized by the experience that you have lost good standing in the organization. You have lost the confidence of the organization, and that's what we want to avoid.